Chapter 561, Recruitment Fair, Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. That's way too fast. Did it already circle the planet several times? Or maybe it's still there, but it's too fast for my vision to keep up. Klein's mouth twitched, deciding to wait a few seconds to see if the creature whose speed surpasses imagination would appear again. He wasn't worried that the summoned spirit world creature would harm the innocent, as one of the descriptions was of a friendly creature. Besides, as long as he forcefully ended the summoning and stopped the ritual, the creature would be immediately sent back to the spirit world, no matter where the creature whose speed surpasses imagination went. A few seconds later, Klein inhaled after failing to see any response from him waiting. He said with ancient Hermes, I end this summoning in my name. The chilling air around him instantly vanished as the swirling cold wind died down and the candle flames returned to their normal color. Klein stepped forward and extinguished the candle, intending to revise the last sentence and try again. As for the two phrases, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, he had no intention of changing them. The first sentence was directed at the spirit world, and it could only be replaced with synonyms, so it didn't matter if he changed it or not. The second sentence was a prerequisite for Klein to ensure his own safety, otherwise, it would have been a horror story instead of a hilarious one. I don't need to use surpasses imagination as an adjective. But others might not meet my needs. Perhaps I can change my train of thought. A messenger doesn't have to run that fast. A normal speed is fine. There are other ways to ensure safety. I just need to get malicious beings to ignore it and neglect it. I'll try a spirit world creature that's easily neglected. After 2 or 3 minutes of deliberation, Klein held a ritual again. When he was done with the preparations, he chanted a new incantation, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the being who is easily neglected. The interior of the warehouse became abnormally quiet. There was no wind, nor did it turn cold within the wall of spirituality. Even the color of the candle remained unchanged. Klein waited, watching, hoping for a good messenger. After about 10 seconds, he sighed and looked around. There's nothing. The description was of no effect this time. He didn't wait any longer and followed the procedure of ending the summoning and extinguishing the candle. To his puzzlement, the candle flame even shook a few times in the end. Did I miss something? Klein frowned, and then he relaxed, throwing the matter to the back of his mind. He reconsidered the question of how to modify the description and continued targeting the third sentence. I'll switch to another train of thought. If a messenger is especially good at enduring scuffles and has great survivability, it's still okay. No matter what, a messenger that can deliver the letter to the target is a good messenger. Klein pondered for a moment, then he held the summoning ritual for the third time. Amidst the fragrance of herbs and essential oils, and under the dim light of the candlelight, the shadows on his face darted about as his mouth gaped open and closed. I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, an extraordinary creature who has extremely high survivability. The flame of the candle flared and stretched, illuminating the bright red interior of the altar. In Klein's spirit vision, white bones drilled out from the ground, overlapping to form what looked like a safe. I've finally summoned something I can see. Furthermore, it's a creature with extremely high survivability. It looks very much like a safe. Just one look is enough to tell that it's good at taking a beating. Klein breathed a sigh of relief and spoke in the ancient Hermes, are you willing to be my messenger? The skeletal creature that looked like a safe quickly indicated its willingness. Then it wriggled the bones beneath it and crawled toward Klein slowly, very slowly. It took 10 seconds to crawl a centimeter. This is way too slow. Klein's smile froze on his face. Although messengers completed their mission by traveling through the spirit world, that didn't mean that they didn't need speed. Within the spirit world, distance and orientation were chaotic. The most important thing was to find and lock onto a location. As long as an accurate, clear, immediate coordinates were provided, such as the summoning ritual just now or a simplified ritual that involved blowing a whistle, then no matter where the messenger was in the spirit world, it would immediately appear within the altar. When the location wasn't that immediate and only had a contractual connection or a previous anchor point, the messenger needed to spend time to distinguish the location, roam the spirit world, and search for the target. This required a certain amount of speed. If it were to deliver the letter, the recipient might not even receive it by the time they die. Klein helplessly thought as he looked at the slowly crawling skeletal creature. He let the smile reappear on his face. After some careful consideration, I think it's best I don't trouble you. Thank you for your willingness. The creature made of illusory white bones stopped. Compared to before, it appeared as though it hadn't moved at all. Klein quickly cancelled the summoning and rubbed his forehead. He was a little depressed and had decided to abandon himself to despair. He decided to use a less troublesome method to find messengers, which was public recruitment, an interview selection. After taking a deep breath, Klein calmed his mind and began the ritual seriously. Looking at the candle flame that was quietly burning, he took a step back and said, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, a unique being that is willing to be my messenger. Whoosh! The wind blew fiercely inside the wall of spirituality, and Klein's half-top hat almost flew off of his head. The candle flame shook and expanded to the size of a human head. It was so pale that it seemed to have lost its body temperature. A translucent head slowly emerged, as if it had just broken through a thin membrane. Its hair was a light gold color and was smooth. Its eyes were blood red, and it had an imposing appearance. Looks a little familiar. Klein silently muttered. The head had fully shown itself, but what followed wasn't its neck, but an illusory hand that held the end of the head's hair. Behind the palm were complicated patterns, but the color of the cuffs was dark. Chapter 562, Helene Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Beyonder Gathering? Klein thought for a bit, then he nodded and responded, okay. I should bring forward to the collection of the supplementary ingredients of the Nimblewright Master Potion. I can also see if I might meet an artisan. He subconsciously started to make arrangements in his mind. Upon seeing Gehrman Sparrow agree, Danitz breathed a quiet sigh of relief, unable to contain his joy. For the past few days, having had his bounty raised significantly, he had obediently stayed in the suite to monitor the radio transceiver. He was so bored that he yearned for the evening to arrive immediately. The Beyonder gathering that Danitz mentioned was at the Amiris Leaf Bar, where pirates, informants, and adventurers were active. It was the first choice if one wanted to gather information and buy supplies. Dressed in a black coat and silk top hat, Klein followed Danitz through the crowded bar's lobby and into a card room. Under the watchful gaze of several bouncers, he gave the predetermined signal and descended down a flight of hidden stairs to a wide underground area. It's like the Evil Dragon Bar in Tingen City. There's an underground market for herbs, essential oils, ancient books, charms, and all sorts of common mysticism materials. However, the difference is that there are also all sorts of guns and ammunition for sale. Klein even discovered antiquated muskets and lead bullets. They also sell fake identity documents and fake seals. As expected of an overseas colony, their industry is much more developed than Tingen's. I'll buy a batch of ingredients later to make charms in the Sea God domain. There will always be some discounts if I purchase them in large quantities. Klein slightly turned his head from side to take in the situation in the underground area. Next to him, Danitz, who was already doubtful about his own disguise skills, had deliberately put on a cap, keeping the front of his cap down to cover half his face. With great familiarity, he led Klein to the other end of the underground market and knocked on the closed door with 2 long knocks and 4 short knocks. Behind the door, there was only a single candle. It swayed on the lampstand on the side wall, scattering yellow light onto the tiny room. Danitz pointed to the long robes, masks, and other items which were hanging or placed on a table, and said to Klein, "It's up to you to decide whether you would don a disguise. You can also choose not to." Klein looked around, his gaze sweeping past the bouncers in the room. "I don't need it. I am now an informant for the kingdom's military, and the Church of Storms also knows of my identity, so there's nothing for me to be afraid of. If the pirates and adventurers have any malicious thoughts about me because of my lack of a disguise, and if they attempt to attack me, hee." Klein suddenly pictured bounty rewards flying towards him one by one. Danitz curled his lips secretly, picked up a black iron mask, and wore it. Then, he and Klein passed through a dim corridor and into another room under a bouncer's lead. The place was lavishly decorated. The floor was covered with a thick carpet from the southern continent, the walls were decorated with shining lampstands, and the fresh smell of candles could be caught as they suffused with light. Klein glanced around and, without Danitz's help, found a brown leather sofa and sat down on it. He leaned back and crossed his right leg. There were already more than 20 people of various genders gathered here. Some were in hooded robes, while others showed their faces. According to Danitz's description in the morning, not all of the people attending this gathering were Beyonders. There were spokesmen for certain factions, as well as adventurers, pirates, and mysticism enthusiasts who wanted to become Beyonders. Time slowly passed in that quiet environment. About 7 or 8 minutes later, the old man who was sitting on a reclining chair straightened his back and crossed his hands. He chuckled. "Everyone, let's begin." Because he was old, his white hair was sparse, leaving only a thin layer. However, his light brown eyes weren't turbid, with them being bright and sharp. The organizer of the gathering, Strongman Ozil, a famous pirate in the past, and now the secret boss of the Amiris Leaf Bar, Danitz leaned slightly and introduced the man to Klein with a suppressed voice. He'd actually mentioned it in the morning, but he was afraid that Gehrman Sparrow failed to match a name to the face and would later vent his anger on himself. It's a sorrowful matter to have a secret grasped by others. Danitz sighed inwardly. Klein nodded indiscernibly as he silently watched the transactions happen. There were potion formulas for warrior, sailor, mystery prior, and others, but no one bought them. The expectant sellers were disappointed again and again. Danitz glanced at Gehrman Sparrow, who wore an expressionless face. He then leaned over, and explained in a low voice, "There is no notary at this gathering, nor any powerful seer. The authenticity of the potion formula cannot be guaranteed. It's too easy to fake such things, and even if people recognize that the formula is fake, the seller cannot be punished because he might be a victim as well. I know. This is one of the reasons why potion formulas fail to be widely spread." Klein uncrossed his right leg, leaned forward slightly, and said in a voice that was neither loud nor low, "I need the remnant spirituality of an ancient wraith." He didn't mention the eyes of a 6-winged gargoyle, the spring water from Sonia Island's Golden Spring, or any other supplementary ingredients. He was worried that others would guess that he was a faceless who was preparing to advance to Nimblewright Master. When he was in Tingen, Klein had relied on the purchase of supplementary ingredients to accurately suspect that Daxter Guderian was a prospective spectator, and thus, he figured out his identity as a member of the Psychology Alchemists. It was impossible to deduce any more from the remnant spirituality of an ancient wraith alone, as many of the rituals in the undead domain would use it. Although Klein didn't disguise himself, he still had to be careful. The room was silent for 2 seconds. Then, a slightly hoarse voice sounded. "How much do you need? Someone really has it?" Klein controlled his expression and didn't let his joy show on his face. He tilted his head to look at the speaker and saw that he was a man in his 30s who was clearly of native blood. The man's skin was bronzed, but he had a dull luster from chronic malnutrition or a lack of light. His face was thin, his cheekbones protruded, and his eyes were sunken, more white than black. "A small bottle." Klein pulled out a small metal bottle as an example. The thin, dark man was silent for a moment before saying, £500. That's reasonable. Klein originally wanted to haggle, but he caught a glimpse of Danitz sitting beside him out of the corner of his eye. I'm Gehrman Sparrow, a cold, crazy adventurer. Klein repeated this line 3 times inwardly, quietly took a deep breath, and calmly nodded. Okay. He took out the large stack of cash he had prepared, and he counted out a sum of £500. The man with the mostly white eyes took out a glass test tube from his pocket, threw it at Klein, and said, all the spirituality will be gone after a year. He wasn't afraid that the other party wouldn't be unable to catch it, because even if it were to break, it wouldn't affect the material itself. It would only be a matter of changing the container. Klein raised his right hand and accurately caught the glass tube. He saw many phosphorescent spots floating in the tube, and when they touched the glass wall, they would strangely expand, forming a face with blurred features that opened to form a mouth that screamed silently. It's real. Klein nodded to himself and handed the thick stack of cash worth £500 to the attendant who approached and handed it to the seller. The trading continued, most of it failing with only a small number succeeding. At the end of the day, the gathering's organizer, Strongman Oziel, laughed and said, I have a request. As he spoke, he pulled out a photo from his inside pocket. The reward for finding the person above is £1,000 or some other common beyonder ingredient of equal value. Remember, do not hurt her. £1,000? This would make most adventurers go crazy. I wonder who he's looking for, to offer such a high reward. Not surprisingly, Klein saw that everyone present was willing to give it a try. The picture began to be passed in a counterclockwise fashion, and a few minutes later, it was in Klein's hands. As he casually swept a glance over it, a bit of surprise suddenly surfaced in his heart. The woman in the photo was rather pretty, with bright red hair and a pair of green eyes that resembled emeralds. Her skin wasn't fair, but she gave off a healthy feeling. At the time of the photo shoot, she was wearing a long, lake-colored skirt. Her waist was tightened with a flower-shaped ribbon, making her appear exceptionally slender. Although her face seemed to be smiling, her overall appearance was one of displeasure and awkwardness. A girl with a good family background. Who would pay £1,000 to find her? Furthermore, the premise is that she cannot be hurt. A picture of her forcing a smile. Many romance stories with intertwined love and hate flashed in Klein's mind. Stories like a tyrannical pirate falling in love with a wealthy merchant's daughter, abducting her onto his boat before she eventually escaped, or some noble lady from a declining noble family turning into a pirate, and was later caught due to a mistake, only to have a sinful relationship with a mid- or high-ranking mandated punisher or military officer, thus escaping from her predicament and imprisonment. How a newly advanced demoness accidentally fell into a debt of love when giving someone pleasure. Such thoughts flashed through his mind, and Klein almost raised his hand to cover his face. I've read too many novels in my previous life. And I happen to have a trauma because of demonesses in this world. He sighed to himself, looked up at Oziel and asked, what's her name? Helene, Oziel answered succinctly, but she must have switched to using a fake alias. Helene, a typical female Intis name. Klein asked again, is there anything she often wears? Hair is fine too. This was a medium that could be used to seek her with divination. Klein didn't mention things like recently worn clothes that hadn't been washed, afraid that the employer behind the scenes would throw him a piece of lingerie, making it awkward. Oziel shook his head. Nothing. She has a strong anti-tracking ability. What's her strength like? Another member of the gathering asked. Oziel said in a serious manner, the employer didn't give a detailed description. It said that she isn't too strong, but she's stronger than a sequence 9. You don't need to capture her. As long as you determine her whereabouts, you will be paid. Chapter 563, The Fool's Blessing. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. As long as you can confirm her location, you can receive £1,000. This is the first time I've seen such a mission. On the street outside the Amiris Leaf Bar, Danitz rubbed his hands together with a hint of excitement. He clenched his fists and hit the tall iron-black gas lamppost, yearning to immediately wander around the city and find the red-haired woman named Helene. To him, £1,000 wasn't a small sum. It was enough to add one more house to his line of properties in Byam. It just wouldn't be located in the most prosperous and valuable districts. The elf flying carpet he had previously obtained was only around £2,000 to £3,000, and this was the reward he had gained from fighting dangerous fellows such as Steel Mavady and Blood Brambles Hendry. It was completely incomparable to the easy mission of finding someone. Klein, who was walking ahead, held a package wrapped in newspaper. They were the charm materials which had cost him £15. He slowed his pace a little, glanced at Danitz, and spoke without expression, £5,500. Danitz's excitement froze on his face. Only then did he remember an important problem. In the eyes of the other pirates and adventurers, he was as attractive as red-haired Helene. They didn't need to fight him. Once they recognized him, they could report his identity to the military, the church, or the police, and they would receive a reward worth more than £1,000. After all, he was already a great pirate worth £5,500. Searching for red-haired Helene would be equivalent to a lady with a nice figure and good looks entering the Red Theatre for entertainment. Dog, sh*t. Danitz spat out a single word, his face grim, as he stretched out the middle consonant. At the same time, he automatically pulled down his cap even lower. Klein, who had poured cold water on Danitz, resumed his normal walking speed and considered the question of finding the red-haired Helene. The lack of a medium and the necessary information had made it difficult for him to use divination, so he had to consider other methods. Activate my underlings to do an investigation of the entire city. This is something that can only be done by the church, the military, and the police. Even the local gangs would find it difficult to accomplish. Wait, I think I can. I'm not sea god Calvetua. My believers are all across Byam and Blue Mountain Island. I just need to make an announcement, no, a revelation to all my believers, and I can get them to search for red-haired Helene. But would this damage my standing? To do something like that for £1,000, even a god wants some face. If I were the real sea god, I wouldn't care about this. However, I'm now acting as Calvetua. I have to maintain the dignity of a god as best as I can. Back when Calvetua was on the verge of collapse, it didn't even broadcast a revelation when it was urgently trying to find Letitia and her subordinates. Instead, it only gave orders to his worshippers in the upper echelons. I can change its commandments as part of reconstructing an image, but I can't appear too low class. Well, that should also be a requirement of true acting. It would be difficult to organize an investigation just by giving Colot, Edmonton, and the others a revelation. Furthermore, they would definitely magnify the severity of the issue and cause a huge commotion. It would only make things more difficult to deal with later. There's another solution. I can throw the radio transceiver above the gray fog and attempt to contact the magic mirror, Rhodes. I'll ask him about red-haired Helene's location. I have to be careful about this. I need to prepare ahead of time and confirm it via divination. I don't want to receive strange telegrams from the true creator or the primordial demoness. Even a glance at it would probably make me go mad. Having quickly come up with ideas, Klein boarded a rental carriage parked at the corner of the street. Danitz pressed his cap and followed closely behind. Returning to the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein took off his hat and coat while saying to Danitz, "If your captain contacts you through a dream, ask for information about red-haired Helene. She probably doesn't know. Otherwise, I would have known this red-haired Helene." Danitz grinned. "I don't know who's looking for her, to be willing to pay £1,000. His thoughts were whirling, imagining a love story akin to the ones Emperor Roselle had penned. Klein glanced at him and casually mentioned, "I'll do the monitoring tonight." "You're doing it?" Danitz snapped out of his fantasies, wondering if he had heard wrongly. "Yes." Klein nodded. Gehrman Sparrow realizes that I'm too exhausted. Although this fellow is a little crazy, he's still a good person at heart. He had actually decided to risk his life to save those people when we were at Bansi Harbor for reasons that couldn't be considered good. Dannett sighed to himself. Carrying the radio transceiver and its relevant parts, Klein went into the bedroom, locked the door, and threw them above the gray fog with a sacrificial ritual. After doing all of this, he was in no hurry to leave the towering palace. He waved his hand, and the sea god scepter flew out from the junk pile. He scanned through the prayers of different people and gathered experience on how people had multiple facades. In the process, he would occasionally respond, like a child who still had great interest in a new toy. As Klein's browsing drew to a close, ripples of light began to form around the seat of the fool. Someone is praying to me, to the fool, and not to see God. Klein raised his eyebrows and emanated his spirituality, scanning the scene within the rippling light. Enmat Harbor, in a room with closed curtains. Dressed in a classic black robe, Ed Sheeran resisted the impulse in his heart and said to the sweet, young girl, Denise, the gift of God is in our bodies, but if we want to obtain it, we must have a teacher guide it out. Your soul is pure and beloved by the gods. I will personally guide you. In the process, no matter what happens, you must trust me and listen to me. Before that, do you have any questions? Ed Sheeran was a swindler. His specialty was to establish a cult to cheat others for money and sex. He would then decisively flee before it reached a certain scale that would garner attention from the police. This time, he had come from Backlund, disguised as one of the fools blessed that many gangsters in the capital were looking for. He had also developed a batch of believers in his target group. He falsely claimed that the fool was the incarnation of the Lord of the Storms and that he would come to save the faithful during the apocalypse. This was a secret that could not be widely publicized and could only be spread in secret, otherwise, it would attract the attention of the gods of the other churches. Only those who were chosen would be able to believe in the fool in advance and be the first batch of the redeemed. To make himself appear more persuasive, he spent a lot of money in Backlund, buying a piece of paper with the honorific name of the fool written on it. As for what was on the piece of paper, his comment was, "It looks like it's real." Denise asked with both fear and anticipation, "Lord Adorer, why didn't we get a response when we read the honorific name of God? Aren't we blessed to have been selected and should bathe in God's grace?" "I'll immediately give you God's grace." Ed Sheeran took a deep breath and suppressed the tantalizing images in his mind. 2 reasons. First, you haven't discovered the grace of God which is hidden in your body. I will help you complete that later. Second, you are not devout enough. Don't argue, I can see right through you. After you do all of this, you will be able to recite the honorific name of God and receive a response, just like me. Under Denise's idolizing and curious gaze, Ed Sheeran picked up a pen on the table beside her and scribbled a line of words. It was the Hermes language used for a sacrificial offering. In order to make the scam a success, Ed Sheeran had acquired a lot of religious knowledge and even went to a university's Department of History to sit in on archaeology courses. Holding the paper in front of Denise, he proudly recited the words he had written in Hermes, the fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Following that, with half-closed eyes and open arms, he said dreamily, "I feel the blessings of God." At this moment, a streak of silver lightning descended from the sky and landed right on Ed Sheeran's head. With a sizzling sound, the tiny electric bolts snaking across his body scurried. With God's blessing, he fell to the ground and his body quickly charred while his muscles twitched violently. After a few seconds, he stopped all movement, including breathing as Denise exclaimed, "Lord Ed Sheeran is indeed God's blessed." Denise finally sensed that something wasn't right. She stepped forward carefully, lifted her skirt and knelt down, placing her finger to the tip of Ed Sheeran's nose. He's dead. He's dead. Denise jerked back and fell to the ground in terror. She burst into tears and stumbled out of the room, heading for the nearby police station. Atop the gray fog, Klein silently retracted the sea god scepter. You actually dared to use my name to cheat others of their wealth and sully women. The corner of his mouth twitched, wishing he could give another bolt of lightning to that man named Ed Sheeran. This was called a corpse mutilation. The girl would probably call the police, right? This kind of case would inevitably be referred to a corresponding Beyonder team. I wonder if it will be the Nighthawks, the mandated punishers, or the machinery hive mind. After what Mr. A has done, my reputation as the fool isn't small in Backland. Perhaps I already have a dossier in the official organizations. Well, maybe they'll put everything together and hand it over to the Red Gloves or something similar for handling. Klein's past identity and insight as a Nighthawk had allowed him to consider the possible future developments. However, he quickly put this matter to the back of his mind, because no matter what, they wouldn't be able to detect that it was him. Klein threw the sea god scepter back into the junk pile, ready to return to the real world. Suddenly, one of the dark red stars that were quietly floating in the boundless gray fog had lit up all of a sudden, emitting a light that was as bright as water. It swelled and shrunk repeatedly in an abnormally conspicuous manner. This was a crimson star that didn't belong to any member of the Tarot Club. What a busy day today. Who could it be? Like Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and Little Sun, someone is relying on a certain object to connect with the gray fog? Klein's spirituality spread out as he thought. He didn't respond and only observed. As Klein's spirituality made contact, the constantly expanding and contracting crimson star presented the images and sounds contained within. A black-haired woman in a classical robe had fallen to the ground, writhing in pain. She held an ordinary-looking celestial globe in one hand, and in the other, she held a short scepter that wasn't even the length of a small arm. Her strong will to survive almost broke through the binding of the crimson stars and directly entered Klein's ears. Like Justice and the Sun, this woman's figure appeared rather blurry, making it difficult to discern her exact appearance, but there were some things Klein could clearly see, such as her facial features, such as her splitting cheek muscles and the flesh inside that was contracting into eyeballs. Other features included her ears stretching outwards like a trumpet, or her fingers which were scratching at the floor to create bright streaks of blood, as well as a pair of cold, lashless eyes that were almost transparent and were situated above her. The black-haired girl's mutation didn't decline. Her body was tenaciously healing itself, causing the flesh and blood which resembled an eyeball to melt away. Her ruptured muscles fused together, and her extended ears shrunk inward. Every detail was in a repetitive seesaw-like struggle between the two states. Klein was dazzled by the illusory, lashless eyes. It was as if he had returned to Tingen, back to the time when he had first mastered spirit vision. Back then, he had seen a pair of eyes like that on old Neil's back. Hidden Sage. Klein leaned back in his chair, stretched out his hand, and took hold of the sea god's scepter that once again flew out of the junk pile. He planned to lend a helping hand and smite those evil eyes with a few bolts of lightning. However, after careful examination, he sharply realized that the black-haired woman's abnormality had stemmed from the crazy ravings that no one else could hear. This was because the source of everything was in her ears, deep within her spirit body, her soul body. It's very similar to the situation when Miss Magician suffers from the ravings of the full moon. Fortunately, I'm experienced. Otherwise, I would have given the wrong response. Klein thought for a moment and thought of a way to save her. It was to pull her spirit body above the gray fog and directly block out the crazy ravings. As long as the source of the power was gone, the mutation would be quickly dealt with by the lady's self-recovery powers. As for whether she was worth saving, or if she harbored malicious intentions, the current him was no longer as troubled as he was in the past. If the black-haired lady had committed a heinous crime to a certain degree and had already established a connection with the mysterious space above the gray fog through the crimson star, Klein could give her a few lightning bolts at any time and let her be thrown back to where she belonged. If she really has any kind of malicious intentions, or if she causes any accidents, I, who possess the sea god scepter, the Dark Emperor card, and am capable of using the Grey Fog's power to some degree, wouldn't lack the ability to resist. Klein held onto the white bone scepter in his right hand and pointed at the remote star. His spirit energy surged and poured into the crimson-red light that was like flowing water. This time, he was able to establish the mysterious and stable connection with ease. The black-haired lady's figure instantly appeared at the side of the long bronze table, sitting on a chair that didn't belong to any of the current members of the Tarot Club. As for Klein, he could see from the final image of the crimson stars that the mutation on her body had weakened significantly. He nodded indiscernibly, patiently waiting for the other party to speak. The black-haired lady was still somewhat adrift. 1 second, she was struggling in extreme pain, with her vision gradually turning black, and the next second, she was inside a towering domed palace. Beneath her was an endless and silent grey fog that extended outwards endlessly. How couldn't she be taken aback? After a brief moment of silence, she turned her gaze to the figure leisurely sitting at the very end of the mottled long table. She asked with an ethereal voice, "Is this the underworld?" "You aren't dead." Klein laughed. At this moment, he saw that the symbol tainted with starlight quickly changed on the back of the black-haired lady's high back chair, forming a pair of eyes that contained countless resplendent stars. They were cold and indifferent, and they lacked eyelashes. Based on his past experiences, he believed that this was a symbol representing the mystery prior pathway. The black-haired lady froze, gradually regaining her senses. Instinctively, she scanned her surroundings before finally casting her gaze at the mysterious man shrouded behind the grey fog. White shirt, tailcoat, no tie, black pants, bright leather boots, seemingly black hair, and a blurry appearance. There's nothing strange about this. He casually holds a milky white scepter that's slightly longer than an arm in his hand, and that scepter. The black-haired lady's pupils contracted as the depths of her eyes reflected, in its entirety, the blue gemstones, and the aura of a storm from the surroundings that it stirred. Furthermore, there were countless points of light that surrounded it, giving it a holy and majestic feeling. It's a scepter at the demigod level. He's playing with it like it's a toy. He doesn't care about it at all. The lady in black narrowed her eyes and cautiously asked, "How may I address you?" "You may call me Mr. Fool," the experienced Klein answered. The Fool. The black-haired lady ruminated over the word before asking with deliberation, "I've heard of your honorific name from the Aurora Orders, Mr. Z." She waited for his assertion or denial. "You know the Aurora Orders, Mr. Z. He can be considered an old friend." Klein laughed but didn't reply. Instead, he said, "Do you not plan on introducing yourself? This is the most basic of etiquette." The black-haired lady recalled what had happened to her and fell silent again. After a few seconds, she said in a slightly muffled voice, "My name is Katlia, and I have the nickname Admiral of Stars." "Mr. Fool, were you the one who saved me?" "Admiral of Stars?" The Admiral of Stars, one of the 7 pirate admirals, someone with a bounty of 37,000 pounds. "I've saved a treasure trove, no, a person of high status." Klein shifted in his seat slightly, half surprised, half amused. He chuckled and replied, "Wasn't that obvious?" Admiral of Stars Katlia immediately stood up and said, "Thank you for your assistance. If you have anything you need me to do, you can directly instruct me, as long as it is within my capabilities and doesn't violate my principles." "That's nice of you. Very seasoned and experienced. She's indeed worthy of being one," known Admiral of Stars. Klein couldn't help but sigh. Among his Tarot Club members, with the exception of the Hanged Man and his incarnation, the world, all of them were rather inexperienced when they first participated. Miss Justice was one of those who vaguely understood the mysterious world, but she hadn't really stepped into it yet. The Sun was one of those who received sufficient education, but due to the isolated environment and his relatively young age, he was very simple and honest. The Magician may have been stuck at Sequence 9 for several years, but she had always been an unaffiliated Beyonder. She didn't know much about all sorts of hidden factions, and she lacked experience. The moon, Emlyn, comes from a Beyonder race, with a faction with a deep heritage backing him. However, due to his preference of staying home to play with dolls, he is greatly lacking in experience in certain aspects. He was very gullible as a result. That fellow, Emlyn, is smart, but if he were to, meet Demonis Trissy, he would be tricked by her into selling his dolls. Klein secretly teased the vampire, which could be considered a friend in the real world. He looked at Admiral of Stars and didn't directly respond to the matter of her repaying him for saving her life. Instead, he smiled and asked, "Are you a member of the Moses Ascetic Order?" "Yes." Cadlia didn't believe that this was something she could hide from Mr. Fool. Klein smiled. "What did you just do to provoke that guy?" He wasn't sure that the pair of eyes belonged to the hidden sage, so he used a vague term, "that guy," instead, so that, no matter what, the fool was absolutely correct and upheld his standing. After a moment of silence, Cadlia said, "No, I didn't provoke him." She paused, then she continued, "The members of the Moses Ascetic Order believe that all objects are numeric, and we pursue knowledge itself. However, Emperor Roselle once said that we aren't pursuing knowledge, but that knowledge is pursuing us. The hidden sage is an embodiment of knowledge itself. He is chasing us, every single Moses Ascetic Order member. When too much knowledge is injected into us, without us being able to quickly digest and master it, a situation like before would happen. Either I lower my defenses and open my mind to accept the modifications from the hidden sage, or I would tenaciously resist it or end up losing control. If that's the case, you aren't specifically targeted by the hidden sage. Even if you managed to escape from the previous predicament, you wouldn't be suspected of anything. According to what you said, you are very knowledgeable. Back then, old Neil only wanted to obtain the knowledge of human body refining and of a perfect revival. Klein suddenly sighed, but he didn't show it on his face. The reputation of Admiral of Stars isn't too bad. She's the kind of pirate with a code of honor. Klein stopped his thoughts and calmly said, "If something similar happens again, you can recite my name." "Recite your name." Cadlia's lips quivered, instinctively wanting to refuse. In the end, she didn't say anything as she fell silent for a long time. After repeatedly weighing the pros and cons, she stood up, crossed her arms in front of her chest, and slightly bowed as she said, "How may I be of service?" Klein laughed and said in an indifferent tone, "In the future, provide some assistance to my adorers." "By your will." Cadlia sat down again and asked cautiously, "Is the honorific name provided by Mr. Z yours?" She then repeated the honorific name of the fool to him. Klein nodded his head, indicating that she was right. Cadlia looked at the other empty seats and asked after some deliberation, "Honorable Mr. Fool, will there be others here as well?" Klein laughed and replied, "People like yourself. They set up a regular gathering, and I bear witness." After a few seconds of silence, Cadlia asked, "Can I participate?" She thought that since she wasn't connected with the mysterious existence known as the Fool, it was better to know more than to do nothing. "Of course, you have money, knowledge, influence, and needs." Klein casually leaned against the back of the chair. "Sure. Without my permission, you are not to leak this matter." "All right." Cadlia answered without hesitation. Klein tapped his left index finger and revealed the rest of the tarot cards on the bronze table. They used tarot cards as their code names. "These are the remaining ones. Pick one." Cadlia scanned the cards and immediately said, "The Hermit." Inside the captain's cabin, Cadlia slowly got up from the floor and walked in silence to the full-length mirror next to the bookcase. In the mirror, the skin on her face was fair and smooth, without a single crack. Her ears were small and normal, showing no signs of expanding. Her deep purple eyes were calm, as if nothing had happened. However, she could see more with her eyes that carried a sense of mystery. Hidden beneath her skin were eye-like flesh and blood that hadn't fully dissolved, her soul body, whose pain and madness were rapidly dispersing, innumerable illusory objects with ineffable forms that roamed about, sailors who were cleaning the deck several rooms away. Everything within a range of a few dozen meters was revealed to her in an unobscured but unusually chaotic manner. From the day she had become a Sequence 5 Constellations Master, her mystery prior powers had been greatly enhanced. She could faintly see that there were thick curtains around her that resembled shadows, and behind the curtains, something seemed to be watching her and all living beings. There are no traces of being influenced by Mr. Fool, which in turn explains many things. He was able to directly pull my soul body into that mysterious space with a strange, tyrannical, and secretive power. It's not something that a demigod scepter can compare to. Although he was dressed in contemporary clothing, this doesn't mean anything. For an existence at this level, it's very easy for different people to see him in different forms, and his true appearance would probably cause every person that sees him directly to lose control and die. Cadlia stared at herself in the mirror, thinking silently about what had just happened. It was inevitable that she had some predictions about Mr. Fool's identity, but this was only guesswork without any evidence. The fact that he is wearing a tailcoat doesn't mean that he is very young or that he was born recently. Perhaps his essence is ancient, even older than the 7 gods. The knowledge that is pursuing me tells me that before the cataclysm, there were indeed older gods, and he might be one of them, Cadlia said silently to herself before turning away from the full-length mirror and walking back to the place where she had struggled in pain. She picked up her glasses that had fallen to the side. She put the thick glasses on her nose, hiding her deep purple eyes. Everything that didn't appear under a normal person's vision quickly disappeared from her sight. Cadlia stood there thinking again about the influence Mr. Fool Ancu's so-called tarot club would have on her. Unknowingly, a tall figure surfaced in her mind. The words that she would never forget had once again echoed in her ears. "Is this my destiny, Your Majesty?" She closed her eyes. In the ancient and majestic palace above the grey fog, Klein's fingers tapped the edge of the long, model table as he made all the tarot cards on the table disappear. He was thinking about what the subsequent developments would be after the Admiral of Stars joined the Tarot Club. If there's no other way, and if I might really need to take a detour from a safe sea route and enter the sea that was once a battlefield of the gods, to search for singing mermaids, having the hermit, who is fearful of the fool, in my control is better than cooperating with Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina. Using her ship would be much safer. Yes, Mr. Hanged Man will be a backup choice. Admiral of Stars is a Moses Ascetic Order member. She grasps plenty of knowledge and is very helpful towards the Tarot Club, but it's a latent risk for me. Mr. Fool's image is built on the foundation of being unfathomable. In the future, I have to be more careful. I mustn't answer things I'm not sure of. On matters I'm unconfident about, I'd rather be vague and handle matters like a charlatan. Of course, to fully resolve this problem, I should quickly improve myself and become a high sequence beyonder. My strength needs to match my level, and my standards need to match that pedestal. With such a Sequence 5 powerhouse with many subordinates under her, the overall strength of the Tarot Club isn't considered low. After obtaining the Sea God Scepter, I don't have to worry that members of the Tarot Club will be too strong, with problems easily arising. I hope that there will come a day when this member of the Moses Ascetic Order, Admiral of Stars, will be able to play an important role in my revenge against the hidden sage. Klein exhaled as he vanished from above the grey fog. Backlund. Beneath St. Samuel Cathedral. A red-gloved nighthawk entered the temporary office assigned to them, with a telegraph in hand. "Captain, something happened at Enmat Harbor," he said to Sol Assurer Soest with some excitement. Soest touched the right side of his hair and asked, "What happened?" "There's a new development from the Fool, the one the Aurora Order is seeking." The member holding the telegraph handed the piece of paper over. His answer immediately attracted the attention of several red gloves who were present, including the man with black hair and green eyes who was taking an afternoon nap with his chair lifted up and his feet on the table. He had covered his face with his hat. Soas took over the telegraph and scanned it before immediately laughing. Someone lied by claiming to be his adorer in an attempt to scam others, but after chanting his name, he was smote to death on the spot by a bolt of lightning. There really is a hidden existence known as the Fool. The files relating to the tarot ritual and the Fool had been handed over to Soist's Red Gloves team. They were in charge of the investigations, but there were no leads, and they didn't put much emphasis on it because they had other missions on hand. The Fool has powers in the lightning domain. Leonard Mitchell removed the black hat from his face. Who knows? If he's the embodiment of some old friend of ours, it's possible to do something similar by preparing a corresponding mystical item. It's not without precedent. This is especially so for the fake gods in the southern continent and the colonial islands. Holy Lord of Storms, those cheats claim that the Fool is another manifestation of the Lord of Storms. This might also be why he was smitten to death. Soist leisurely threw the telegraph aside. Leonard glanced at it, lowered his feet, half-turned, and chuckled. Aren't we going to perform some investigations? How? Are you going to feign ignorance and recite his honorific name? Soist sneered. This has a high probability of catching the tail of the Fool, but I will basically be bidding farewell to this world. My digestion of the nightmare potion has been going pretty well, and I just got another good item. There are still plenty of sequences up ahead which are waiting for me. How can I enter into an eternal sleep so soon? Leonard stroked his drooping hair strands and said, we can get a few criminals on death row to give it a try. But he could just as easily not respond. Soist shook his head. We can start from the two cases that involved the tarot rituals. I'm more and more convinced that it has something to do with the Fool. Firstly, the Fool is one of the major arcana tarot cards. Secondly, the organization that is seeking or cracking down on his adorers is the Aurora Order. And the first case that involved the tarot ritual is the Lenivis case. As such, the Aurora Order's attempt to allow the true creator's descent was foiled. Lenivis pulled at his black vest and got up. Soist thought about it seriously and said, the clues from the other cases happen to have been cut off as well. For now, we have nothing else to do. You can try to investigate the two tarot ritual cases. Sure. Leonard smiled back. This was exactly what he wanted. With a case that no one cared about being handed to him, he had won a certain amount of time to act freely. At 2:50 p.m. Furs returned from the cold streets to her residence while trembling. It wasn't that she wanted to go out in this damp, cold weather, but it was that she had run out of food at home. As for Zio, she had gone all the way to Pritz Harbor to capture a fugitive and collect the bounty. It was unknown when she would be able to return home. She's always instinctively chasing after and capturing fugitives. It can be said that she has been acting in some way. Holding the large brown paper bag in her arms, she habitually fished for her keys to open the mailbox and take out the letters and bills. She entered the house, put the food away, and took off her thick coat that tightly clung to her body. Furs began to look through the letters. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. There was a letter from her teacher, Dorian Gray. After she advanced to Trickmaster, the first thing she did was to write about it in her letter and mail it to Dorian Gray, hoping to receive her teacher's praise and subsequent guidance. However, days had passed without her receiving a reply. For a moment, she wondered if she should visit Pritz Harbor out of concern. Furs quickly opened the envelope and began to read through it. I'm sorry that I have only replied now. I previously left Pritz Harbor for some time for a relative's funeral. Your talent leaves me gratified. Perhaps the stories hidden in your heart have helped you in acting. After you digest the Trickmaster potion, I'll provide you with the Sequence 7 astrologer formula and some ingredients, as well as a gift. The crux when it comes to acting as a Trickmaster lies in performing and hoodwinking. Hoodwinking can also be replaced with deceit. This has been verified by generations of Beyonders. You can take into consideration other pathways like swindler and magician. The meaning behind their names is, in some sense, similar. Furs heaved a sigh of relief, glanced up at the wall clock, and hurried back to her bedroom before locking the door behind her. The weekly tarot gathering was beginning. Not long after, a crimson light flooded her eyes, drowning everything. In the ancient and mysterious palace, just as Furs was about to look at Mr. Fool, she suddenly saw a figure beside her. That seat had always been empty. A new member? A lady? The magician Furs moved her eyeballs slightly, pretending not to care as she half turned her body. Another new member. And it's a lady. Miss Justice was about to get up and greet Mr. Fool when she saw an unfamiliar figure. While feeling puzzled and expectant, she discovered a problem. The women were on one side of the table, while the men were on the other side. This should be divided according to Mr. Fool's intentions. I wonder if there's any symbolic meaning behind it. Yes, the ladies are on the left, and the men are on the right. Being neither left or right is what defines a god like Mr. Fool. Ah, yes, there's also Mr. World. Heh heh, could it be that he's neither man or woman, or even a human? Audrey, you're thinking too much. Justice stood up and bowed, speaking with a light and brisk tone. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool dash. Klein's lips curled up in a slight nod in response to Miss Justice's pleasant greeting. He was just about to introduce the hermit to everyone, and everyone to the hermit when he noticed that Miss Justice didn't stop. Her gaze shifted to the other side as she greeted, Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. This time, she didn't follow the order of the tarot cards but followed the order in which the person joined the tarot club. After this round of greetings, the hermit will essentially get to know everyone, and there's no need for the fool to introduce her. Miss Justice is obviously doing it on purpose. She's really considerate. As long as a beyonder of the spectator domain gets serious, they act differently for matters like this. Klein was surprised for a moment before he praised her silently. At the same time, Alger responded to Audrey's greeting while cautiously sizing up the new member. Female. It's barely possible to tell that she's wearing a black gown with many patterns on it. Her hair is black and her eyes are a little purple. Alger managed to find certain traits in her blurred, distorted image. Suddenly, his heart sank as he recalled the scene he saw a few months ago at the pirate convention. Back then, scattered starlight had magically formed a long bridge between the huge sailboat and the palace in the depths of the island. Admiral of Stars Catlia, who was wearing a black classical robe, had walked in midair, carrying a celestial globe and a short scepter by her waist, and the celestial globe resembled the strange weather bottle that Alger had previously received. The latter had coincidentally shattered after he had been pulled into the gathering by Mr. Fool. Could it be her? She looked somewhat similar based on her attire. But the Admiral of Stars wears glasses, while she doesn't. It cannot be confirmed. It'll require further observation and evidence. Unfortunately, I only saw her from afar and know little. Regardless, I should be careful. When exchanging information, I should try my best to avoid divulging details about my actual situation. The world is Mr. Fool's adorer, letting him know of my identity is totally different compared to the others, the other members. After the matter regarding the sea god, Mr. Fool has recovered a considerable amount of strength. He's even able to pull in a powerhouse like a pirate admiral. Thoughts flashed through Alger's mind as he slightly fidgeted in his seat. Mr. Hanged Man's body language tells me that he is alert and guarded. Does he know the female newcomer, or has he guessed something? How intriguing. Audrey's gaze swept across without leaving a trace and landed on Derek. At this moment, Cadlia was also carefully and seriously examining the members of the tarot club in the order they were greeted in. The mysterious purple color in her eyes slowly flowed in an indiscernible fashion. Although she couldn't truly see through the blurry concealment of the fog, she could still make out the details of their clothing. The Hanged Man, a man in his prime, in his 30s, and has messy hair like seaweed with a rare deep blue color. This is a common mutation seen in the sailor pathway. He's wearing a robe with the patterns of storms and waves. Someone from the Church of Storms. Cadlia's pupils contracted. She didn't show any abnormalities as she continued to observe the rest of the members. The son, a young male, perhaps still underage. His attire is rare and has a simple ancient sense of beauty. It's very tight, making it suitable for combat. Is he a beyonder in this aspect? The world, neither an old man nor a young man. He has a gloomy temperament and wears a hooded robe. He has a feeling as though he's not a living person. Is this something similar to Senor or Steel Mavedi? Or some other sequence I'm unaware of? The magician, a young woman, wears a common lone-style dress. Apart from having a trait of languidness, she doesn't have any other characteristics. This kind of person is the easiest to ignore, so she needs to have more attention paid to her. The moon, a young man. He sits very casually. Black hair, red eyes, and wears an Earth Mother priest robe. There seems to be only one possibility for such a combination, a vampire. As expected, the members of Mr. Fool's Tarot Club aren't that simple. Just a preliminary judgment involves two churches. Cadlia withdrew her gaze and met Audrey's gaze. Sensing the other party's intention to ask, she nodded lightly. The hermit. Cadlia had spoken in ancient Faesac, deliberately avoiding the more familiar languages of Intis and Lone, as she had done so back when she was communicating with Mr. Fool. And she had noticed one thing. Mr. Fool had previously told her that the time the gathering was being held was at 3 p.m. on Monday, Backlund time. Does this mean that the members of this gathering are currently predominantly made up of people from Lone? Cadlia made her own judgment. Justice. Audrey smiled faintly in return. Good afternoon, ma'am hermit. She had noticed what the hermit had been up to and had summarized the person's traits in her heart. She's a very cautious woman who has rich experience in the beyonder world. She's quiet but not introverted, and she's very confident in her observation skills or certain abilities related to her eyes. Furthermore, her clothing style and the short scepter hanging at her waist indicates that her sequence pathway leans towards mystery. This requires confirmation. Perhaps it's just a hobby. At the same time, Cadlia also managed to clearly make out Miss Justice's clothing. She wears 2 hanging earrings, and the earrings are small and exquisite, inlaid with very high-quality emeralds which accentuate her emerald green eyes. They're obviously worth a lot. The necklace around her neck looks unique. It's lined with diamonds that are quite difficult to count, but it's nothing ostentatious. Her milky white dress is simple yet beautiful. It's tailored to be elegant and befitting of her status, like the work of a stylish designer. As she went through the details, Cadlia couldn't help but close her eyes. A 17 to 18-year-old girl. Very rich. The way she moves and her etiquette makes her highly suspect to be a noble with high status, a lone noble. Cadlia didn't know why she sighed in her heart. After a round of greetings from Audrey, there was no need for Klein to introduce the original members of the Tarot Club to the hermit or the hermit to the rest. Just as she sat down, Audrey once again turned to the very end of the long bronze table. Mr. Fool, I'm out of town and have only managed to find 1 page of Roselle's diary. At the last gathering, she had provided 2 pages, so she was 2 pages short of paying off the debt. However, with her being in the manor, even if she often went to the city, all she managed was to collect 1 diary page. In addition, due to the addition of the new member, Hermit, she was careful not to mention the psychology alchemists. She didn't mention Backlund or East Chester County at all. Roselle's diary. Diary. Cadlia almost lost control and couldn't help quickly turning her head to look at Miss Justice, who sat on the same side as her. She clearly remembered that the tall and beautiful figure had one side. It's not a notebook. It's his diary. However, other than him, no one else would be able to understand it. The members of the Tarot Club know that Roselle's notebook is a diary. Mr. Fool is collecting Roselle's diary. Is he trying to crack it to find the secret hidden in that part of history? This is more like a revived ancient god. All sorts of confused and shocked thoughts surfaced in Cadlia's mind. She maintained her staidness, just turning her head in a normal fashion to observe the first transaction. After experiencing many things and trudging her way towards becoming one of the 7 great pirate admirals, she understood that the most important thing for her to do after joining the Tarot Club was to listen more and speak less. "Mr. Fool, I received 3 pages," Furs said with a smile. They had been mailed by Dorian Gray. At last week's gathering, as she hadn't received her teacher's response, and due to the cold weather, she hadn't attended any Beyonder gatherings, so she couldn't provide a single page. Derek followed immediately. "Mr. Fool, I've copied a new legend of the ancient gods." TSK, he's always using the legends of ancient gods as a perfunctory payment. Emlyn glanced contemptuously at the sun. Suddenly, he thought of something. Although the sun claimed that the one they worshipped was the Lord that created everything, he had never tried to cover up the influence that Giant King, Ormer, had on them. However, he had never mentioned that Giant Queen Omabella was who the Kingdom of Silver originally believed in. Could it be that the City of Silver isn't equal to the Kingdom of Silver? I'll wait a minute and try it out. Emlyn had never been able to get over the sun's earlier slandering of the Sanguine. 4 pages of Roselle's diary, a legend of the ancient gods, that's pretty good. I wonder if it contains information about the High Elf, Kohinum. Alas, after Mr. Hanged Man learned that the world is an adorer, I cannot make the world ask questions without any qualms. Klein thought quickly and said with a chuckle, "Very good." He helped Miss Justice, Miss Magician, and Little Sun conjure their respective content, which flashed into the palm of his hand as he casually browsed through them. Mr. Fool doesn't seem to be deciphering it. He can read Emperor Roselle's diary. W.H. Watts, his background. What is his true identity? A sense of indescribable terror and dread suddenly welled up in Catlia's heart. She quickly retracted her gaze and looked at the long bronze table, as if she was memorizing the simple patterns on the table's surface. The reaction the hermit showed when realizing that Mr. Fool is able to read Roselle's diary exceeded my imagination. Is she concerned with this matter, or is it somehow related to her? Audrey pursed her lips thoughtfully. Although the other party hit it quickly and naturally, this was still obvious enough for a sequence 7 from the spectator pathway. Klein sensed the abnormality of the new member, the hermit, because he also wanted to see how this member of the Moses ascetic order, who had a great deal of knowledge, would react to it. The result left him surprised. Isn't that a little too intense? Klein didn't have the luxury of time to think about it as his gaze fell to the first page of Roselle's diary. April 4th. I just returned from Countess Warinka's masquerade party when I suddenly felt an emptiness in my heart. One woman after another. The monotonous and mechanical movements, the indistinguishable smell of perfume, and the warmth from the entanglement of their limbs, all these in exchange for a few seconds of pleasure, followed by endless boredom, disgust, emptiness, and numbness. What pleasure is there in such a life? Is the meaning of life to just do this every single day? I can't go on like this. I have to get out of this sorry state. Also, I need to remind myself that I shouldn't habitually write Arabic numerals. Emperor, there are actually times when you reflect on yourself and act like a hipster. This doesn't fit with my image of you. Klein almost pricked his brows up. He looked down at the second entry of the diary. April 4th, Countess Warinka invited me to a private salon, and she told me that Ma'am Julia would be there, too. Ha, will this conservative blonde girl who had come to loan because of her marriage participate as well? I really look forward to it. I've been imagining her in bed for a long time. I hope her husband, Viscount Delline, doesn't mind. Emperor, have you forgotten what you wrote a few days ago in your diary? TSK, how nice, isn't it? Also, you have a typo. Mind. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. April 14th. I've been attending too many events recently, and the flesh is weak even though the spirit is willing. But that's nothing. Although I'm still young, I should be careful about the risk of retrograding. Temperance. Temperance. The archaeologist sequence has improved my physique and effectively enhanced a certain degree of my powers. However, this isn't its area of expertise, but just something that comes with it. As I continue raising my sequence, the changes from the previous potions will also intensify. This is my motivation. Apparently, apothecaries can concoct medicine that lacks side effects. Perhaps I should ask a few of them. Also, I really have to control myself. Unrestrained behavior will only lead to continuous increases in the threshold, and the degree of satisfaction wouldn't be like how it would normally be. After calming down and thinking about it carefully, there are many things that can be done. Humans are always like this, bound by desire, unable to see what's of value. Why did I transmigrate over here? What secrets lie hidden in the depths of the stars above my head? Where did the original consciousness come from, and if self-cognition purely comes from one's consciousness, then who was I before I had the identity of Huang Tao? Who does the essential part belong to? Emperor, are you describing to me what it means to be a pervert and philosopher before and after the deed? So you do have worries about such matters. I thought you were already fixed in certain traits. Thankfully, you didn't teach Chinese to your children. Yes, you likely didn't teach them. Otherwise, what would they think after seeing such content? Zeradol prophesied that your eldest daughter, Bernadette, would be at odds with you and betray you. It's not without reason. Of course, not teaching them is more of a form of protection. Klein was successfully amused by Roselle's diary entries, but he didn't show it on his face. To him, the diary of Emperor Roselle was both a book of knowledge and a collection of jokes. With this thought, Klein turned to the next page of the diary. October 2nd, Zeradol came to visit me again. Now that I've become a demigod, he wishes that I can honor a promise. He wishes to steal that dangerous sealed artifact from the church. That is a grade 1 sealed artifact, the Antigonus family's notebook from the 4th epoch. At this point, Klein's pupils contracted uncontrollably. This was likely the notebook that the secret order lost later on. This was likely the notebook that led to Klein Moretti's death and how he, Zhou Mingrue, had used Klein Moretti's corpse to successfully awaken in this world. This was the source of everything. It turns out that it didn't fall into the hands of the secret order from the very beginning. Instead, it was sealed within the Church of the God of Craftsmanship, which later turned into the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. Zeradol successfully obtained it through Emperor Roselle. Right, the secret order member inside Creeping Hunger was very fearful of Zeradol. He believed that Zeradol is an undying and abnormal monster. Does this mean that Zeradol gained benefits through the notebook, but an accident happened? He turned from a person who could communicate normally with Roselle into a monster. Therefore, this eventually led to the loss of the Antigonus family's notebook. Of course, it cannot be ruled out that Zeradol deliberately allowed it to be lost. Yes. As Zeradol became a monster, the secret order lost all the mermaids, causing subsequent faceless beyonders to risk their lives out at sea. Rosago succeeded because he attempted to enter that sea, which is a ruin of a battle between gods. All of these thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, causing his heart to feel abnormally heavy. He didn't assume that the Antigonus notebook that he had encountered was closely related to Roselle, because the theory he always had stemmed from the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics, and that some of the details that followed were in line with similar logic. Are they all involved with the upper echelons of the seer pathway? Klein glanced over the palace and took in the endless gray fog. Could it be the cause? He asked himself this question once more from the bottom of his heart. Steadying his emotions, Klein went on to read the subsequent diary pages. I'll have to do it depending on the situation. If it's easy to steal and there's no risk of exposure, I'll try to do it. Otherwise, I'll pretend as though none of this ever happened. It doesn't matter even if Zeradol were to expose me. With my present identity, status, sequence, and influence, as long as I'm willing to repent, the church won't do anything to me. The other 2 diary pages recorded Rozel's train of thought towards constructing his plans to steal the notebook, but none of them seemed likely to succeed. However, Klein knew that Rozel eventually obtained the notebook and handed it over to the head of the secret order, Zeradal. After a moment's thought, Klein turned the page, December 10th. I once again attended that ancient and secret gathering. At the gathering, I discovered that they were unanimous in being extremely hostile to the Solomon Empire of the Fourth Epoch. I raised the question which Mr. Hermes quickly answered. In the Fourth Epoch, the ally and supporter of the Solomon Empire was the true creator. This is very real. I resisted the urge to ask what exactly our organization had done in the history of the Fourth Epoch, but as I left the palace and returned from my dreams, I found that Mr. Hermes's route this time coincided with mine to a certain extent. This ancient man who lived since the cataclysm definitely knew more. I built up a rapport with him and earnestly asked him the question, is that why the organization hates the true creator? Is it solely because he had used the creator's holy name in his name? Mr. Hermes chuckled and said that they weren't such superficial creatures. He asked me in return if I knew what the actual abilities of the shepherd were. Of course, was my answer. He asked again in a profoundly meaningful manner, who do you think would be most likely to develop in the direction of being omniscient and omnipotent among all the present gods? This. The first thought that came to me was the shepherd pathway, which could engage in devouring and grazing, so as to control the souls and characteristics of other beyonders. So that's the reason. This page only had this diary entry, but it contains a lot of information. The Solomon Empire originally came under the true creator's camp. Yes, in the Tudor family's underground ruins, there are humanoid statues of the 6 true gods. Although it isn't certain whether they were worshipping or desecrating the gods, one thing is certain. The 6 gods were involved in the affairs of the 3 empires, and they later had a close relationship with the Trunsoist dynasty. Did the 3 great empires represent 3 different camps of gods? Klein tried to use his archaeological, discovery and historical knowledge to decipher the hidden truth of the previous epoch, but he was still shrouded in fog. Towards Hermes, the oldest master of mysticism, Klein's answer came close to Rozel's. As a beyonder sequence was raised, the saints and angels of the shepherd pathway were able to engage in the grazing of more souls, gaining more and more beyonder powers. In the end, if the true creator had finished grazing the other 21 beyonder pathways, he would be, to some extent, the omnipotent and omniscient creator. There are still a lot of secrets hidden in the sequence pathways. Klein turned to the 4th page. This diary page recorded the actions Rozel took after he consumed the savant potion. He read a lot, studied a lot, tamped down on his foundation very firmly, and increased the scope and depth of his knowledge to a whole new level. In this period of time, he had almost no entertainment. Learning was his greatest form of entertainment. In one of the diary entries, he wrote, "When a person knows with certainty how much he will gain after putting in the effort, and is able to directly tell how much he gains, then he will certainly work as hard as I am now. Isn't this the fundamental attraction of many games?" Klein turned over the last diary page and read the legend of the ancient gods provided by Little Sunday. During the entire process, the majestic palace was completely silent, be it Justice or the moon. They were both considering what to trade and communicate later on. It was the first time that the hermit Katlia had encountered such a situation, but she didn't feel uneasy or uncomfortable at all. Instead, she carefully analyzed the information that the scene revealed. This isn't the first time this is happening. Mr. Fool has the habit of reading Rozel's diary at the tarot gathering. The members will proactively or passively search for the pages for him. However, it can't be confirmed if there were any advance payments. He really can read Rozel's diary. He's searching for secrets that have sunken in the river of history. Just now, that son mentioned that the information he handed in was about legends of ancient gods. This is roughly in line with my previous speculations. At this point in time, Klein had roughly finished reading the new piece of information regarding ancient gods. In the second epoch, in those dark years, every ancient god had a god attached to them, just like the dragon of imagination Enkwelt and his child, the dragon of nightmare, Alzahat. In the information provided by the Sun, there were detailed examples of some typical subsidiary gods, but most of the information didn't provide their true names, only their titles. These included the god of beauty and the goddess of life who were subsidiaries to vampire ancestor, Lilith, the goddess of misfortune and the god of the dead who were subsidiaries to annihilation demonic wolf, Phlegria, the god of luck and the queen of calamity who were subsidiaries to elf king, Saniathrim, and so on and so forth. Queen of Calamity. Klein suddenly thought of the Book of Calamity and the golden wine cup he had taken from the ruins of the High Elf. The name Kohainem and the word Calamity was engraved on it in Elvish. This caused him to make the connection that Kohainem was the Elf King's subsidiary, Queen of Calamity. Unfortunately, I can't directly seek confirmation with Little Sunday. I'll have to wait for further information from him. Klein sighed silently. At the same time, he made some theories about the fact that these titles didn't correspond with their true names. The City of Silver was originally the Kingdom of Silver that came under the Giant King's court's rule. Other than having sufficient understanding of its own forces and enemies, the information regarding the other ancient gods will only come from legends and rumors, and they aren't that detailed. Compared to the simple and easy-to-understand titles, a god's true name can consist of complicated and difficult words to remember which can make it harder for them to be spread. The information provided to Klein when he turned over the page confirmed his theory. However, it gave him new doubts. The dragons also had a dragon of wisdom which was the equivalent of a god in the City of Silver, called Heraburgen, and under Giant King Ormur, there was also his eldest son, the god of dawn, Badheilbrun, and his queen, the goddess of harvest. Why doesn't the goddess of harvest have a real name? Isn't she the queen of the Giant King's court? The City of Silver should have records of it. These so-called subsidiary gods are equal to the angels or king of angels of later times. Yes, the sequence 2 of their pathway, and sequence L's of the other pathways. Klein suppressed his perplexion and inferred the truth from the information recorded in the card of blasphemy. Within the same pathway, if there was a sequence 0, then there wouldn't be a sequence 1, and if there was no sequence 0, then there would be at most 3 sequence L's. However, Klein didn't dare to base his judgment on this. After all, his knowledge was partial, and he didn't even know if there were any preconditions for the sequence 0 and sequence 1, which was derived from the law of beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility. I'll assume this for the time being. Klein leaned back, letting the information in his hands disappear, smiling as he said, "You may begin." At this point, Alger was still seriously examining himself. After considering how to communicate properly, he used the technique of being in the other person's shoes. He started from the point of view of the hermit, who was suspected of being Admiral of Stars, to see what exactly he had exposed. Mr. Fools protects every member's true identity with a blurred and distorted image, but this method doesn't affect the representation of colors. Dark brown colors can be difficult to distinguish, but bright colors are easily grasped. At the very least, I can tell that Miss Justice is blonde with bright green eyes. And for me, the most obvious thing I can't hide is my dark blue hair. But this doesn't say anything. It's not a problem to say that dark blue hair is a common mutation in Beyonders within the Sailor pathway, but the converse isn't true. This is because such traits are hereditary. On Sonia Island and in the Berserk Sea around Desi Bay, they were places where elves originally gathered. Many humans with traces of elvish blood will also have dark blue hair. It's the same for districts where there are a certain number of Church of Storms Beyonders. Ignoring any other trait, it's difficult for the hermit to determine any further information based on the situation. Just as Alger heaved a sigh of relief, he caught sight of the storm robe he was wearing. After returning to the Blue Avenger, not only was he the captain of the ship, but he was also the bishop of the sailors. He often needed to wear the corresponding clothes to celebrate Massachusetts. If he didn't show his devotion in his daily actions, there might come a day when he would be reported by his subordinates. The Church of Storms has always been wary of those members who have been drifting out at sea for a long time, as prolonged acting as pirates might one day turn them into real pirates. In any case, the Lord of Storms has never given a revelation to exclude pirates from his followers. Under the cover of that blurred distortion, it's hard to see the details of one's clothing clearly. This isn't a problem. However, I still have to pay attention in the future. During tarot gatherings, I should change into a set of ordinary clothes. Although I can't be sure, I still have to treat her as a pirate admiral. I can't afford to be careless. Alger thought cautiously. At this moment, he heard the seemingly suppressed voice of the moon Emlyn, which was a result of him being unable to hide his emotions. Mr. Hanged Man, I've done the preparations. When can you obtain the inheritance of that sanguine baron? You mentioned before that it's in the hands of some powerful pirate. You didn't have to say the last sentence. Alger's body instantly stiffened. Powerful pirate. The hermit's eyes swept over the Hanged Man once again. Alger's expression didn't change as he turned his head to the moon and asked, "Have you obtained the funds?" "Of course." Emlyn raised his neck. He originally wanted to wait until the 3-month maturity was up before he went to the bank to withdraw the money, but he soon discovered that he was in a completely different mood after deciding to buy the Sanguine Baron's inheritance. He no longer had any qualms or hesitation. He was filled with expectation and desire, wishing that he could get his hands on it immediately. It was just like how he felt in the past when he was about to buy a beloved doll. He had held back for more than a week before finally giving up by selling the acceptance draft. Although he had lost some money, it was still acceptable. In many situations, an acceptance draft could be used as a currency. "I'll get it for you within the week." "Finally, let's confirm the price, £4,500. Is that all right?" Seeing that a deal was about to be struck, Alger didn't pursue the moon's act of exposing him. Emlyn thought about the dolls in his room, cleared his throat, and said with his eyes furtively darting around. "Can it be cheaper?" "It's not up to me to decide, but I can try to acquire it for you at a lower price. Also, don't forget my commission. Let's lower it. How about £300? Alger's tone didn't change at all. "All right," Emlyn exhaled quietly. Not a very powerful vampire, an underaged or a recently matured one. Cadlia silently watched from the sidelines and made her judgment, seeing that the deal between Mr. Hanged Man and Mr. Moon had been concluded in a few sentences. Audrey habitually felt that she should buy something. "In a week or two, I'll contact the members of the Psychology Alchemists in Eastchester County and tell them that I've become a Psychology Alchemists member. I'll exchange my contribution points for the subsequent potion formula. There's no need to make a request to purchase it here for the time being. Once I find out what ingredients are needed, I can ask for everyone's help. There's no need to buy any mystical items for now. I've already had one of them reimbursed. Being able to obtain such rare items with too great a frequency might imply many problems." Audrey's thoughts raced, and she came up with an idea. She turned halfway and looked at the gloomy man at the end of the table. "Mr. World, you mentioned that you have clues to the characteristic left behind by a psychiatrist. Have you successfully acquired it?" "I plan on buying it for Susie," she silently added in her heart. In fact, when she was considering this matter, she had another slightly mischievous idea, which was to find an excuse for Mr. Fool to turn over the Dark Emperor card which sat beside him. From her point of view, Ma'am Hermit was particularly affected by the matter regarding Roselle's diary. And from how her reaction was extraordinarily excessive before she quickly hid it, it was quite possible that she knew about the cards of blasphemy. Therefore, the moment she saw it, she would expose a lot of problems and express the truest thoughts in her heart. But she dismissed the idea in the end, not because she thought it would be bad to sound out Ma'am Hermit, but that this was a way of showing responsibility to both herself and the Tarot Club, and that she shouldn't make decisions for Mr. Fool. If he wanted Ma'am Hermit to recognize the card of blasphemy, he definitely would have flipped it open himself. If he didn't want to do so, then any attempts would be against his will. Audrey nodded solemnly but almost imperceptibly. At this moment, the world replied hoarsely, "If you're certain that you want it, then I will give it to you as soon as possible. The price is £1,800. Normally, it would be more appropriate to charge £1,200 to £1,500 for a psychiatrist's beyonder characteristic, but Klein had raised the premium slightly to see how much Miss Justice could pay. All right, Audrey agreed with a light tone. She had paid off the money owed to Viscount Glaint. She had received many gifts for having reached adulthood after returning to her family's fief. It was a time when her finances were in a rather good condition. She had even arranged for the money to be returned to Mr. Fool's adorer next month. In the future, her monthly income would be above £3,000, and a substantial portion of her normal expenses wasn't going to be borne by her, due to the love of her parents and the results of her previous meritorious exploits. While the two were discussing, the hanged man was somewhat surprised. The world had just sold the faceless beyonder characteristic the previous time, and he had recently acquired Steele Mavady's beyonder characteristic. Yet, he appeared to have a psychiatrist characteristic in his collection, and all of this happened in less than a month. On second thought, Alger quickly came to an understanding. The world represented a group of adorers of Mr. Fool. That might be the harvest from the other adorers. As he imagined this, the world, who was Klein, was in a state of shock towards Miss Justice's opulence. He had thought that Miss Justice, who had just spent £5,500 on a mystical item, wouldn't be as well off as before. It was just like last year, so he had reserved space for her to haggle. Who knew that she would still agree to the deal without hesitation? Has she dug up a gold mine? Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. Seeing that they had finished their discussion, Derek hurriedly raised his hand, having learned from Miss Justice. Which one of you has the fruit of the Radiant Spirit Pact tree? He had rather successfully collected the other ingredients of the Solar High Priest potion. Just as Catlia had initially figured out that Miss Justice was a yet-to-advance psychiatrist, she heard this request. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "I do." "What can you provide in exchange?" After observing for a long time, she decided to intervene in a small transaction to gain a deeper understanding of how the Tarot Club operated. I can use the history of the City of Silver or the history of dragons, elves, and other dark creatures to barter, Derek said sincerely. Ma'am Hermit, this is a list of commonly seen monsters around the City of Silver. You can choose any ingredients you need from it. How honest. Klein almost looked up at the dome of the magnificent palace. What is he talking about? Catlia frowned slightly, momentarily failing to understand a single word from the son. After a brief moment of consideration, the hermit Catlia made the choice that benefited her the most. She said without betraying her emotions, "I'll make a decision after seeing what the commonly seen monsters are around the City of Silver." Another person who gains something without risking anything of her own. Are the people who spend too much time at sea good at fleecing others? Or is little son in such a state that makes it impossible to resist fleecing him? Klein instinctively excluded himself from the group of seafarers. All right. Under Justice and Company's scrutiny, Derek didn't hesitate to agree to Ma'am Hermit's request. He recalled the content and conjured it, recording the most commonly seen monsters around the City of Silver into a list. However, it wasn't as detailed as before, and there were quite a few missing. After all, the Sun Pathway's improvement in regards to his memory was rather limited. A few days had passed. Catlia received a piece of information and read through it in a serious manner. The more she scanned through it, the more alarmed she became. This was because the types of monsters had far exceeded her expectations by nearly 100 times. Most of the names used were ancient names. If not for her being a Moses Ascetic Order member who had been pursued by knowledge, and having reached Sequence 5, making her experienced and knowledgeable, there was no way she could have known what these names would really be referring to. But even so, there were still a few monsters she had never heard of. They were like shadows who would never reveal themselves in dreams or imaginations, forever lurking in the depths of the darkness. Where exactly is the City of Silver? Why are there so many monsters? 10 seconds later, Cadlia raised her head without a change in expression. She said with a staid tone, "Use the history of your City of Silver in exchange." "All right." Derek's eyes lit up as he seemed to see hope in advancing. He soon conjured the historical materials of the City of Silver with the help of Mr. Fool. Having had ample experience, he knew that even more complete and detailed information was worth more than the fruit of a radiant spirit pact tree, hence, he retained some of what he knew. Cadlia knew that she wasn't Mr. Fool, so it was impossible for her to let the members patiently wait for her to finish reading. Therefore, she casually flipped through it. After confirming its value, she deliberated and asked, "How should I hand over the fruit of the radiant spirit pact tree to you?" Just as she said that, she suddenly thought of something. With a guess, she looked to the end of the long bronze table. "Mr. Fool, is it done by a sacrificial ritual?" This left Audrey, who had prepared the answer, to be clearly stunned. She swallowed the words that she was about to say. Ma'am Hermit is very impressive and knowledgeable. She directly guessed that it's done via a sacrificial and bestowment ritual. Audrey controlled her minute facial expressions as she clicked her tongue and sighed inwardly. Yes. Klein gently nodded without going into detail. He believed that it was impossible for a pirate admiral, a Sequence 5 powerhouse of the Mystery Prior pathway, to not know how a sacrifice was made. This was even something they were good at. Furthermore, she knew the Fool's honorific name, so she didn't lack any of the necessary conditions. Indeed, with a godlike existence bearing witness to a gathering, a sacrificial and bestowment method is the safest and most convenient way of trading. And a conversation through the soul body can result in direct knowledge transfer. Cadlia thanked him before saying to the sun, "I'll do it as soon as possible." Although she didn't show any abnormalities, her heart was in no way calm. From her casual flipping of the information provided by the sun, she discovered that the City of Silver was truly filled with oddities. It included matters about being forsaken by the Lord, how it didn't have a sun, resulting in a state of eternal darkness and high and low-frequency lightning. Matters like how strange and terrifying monsters hid in the darkness when there was no light, and how they survived thanks to black-faced grass. It mentioned that they had survived for more than 2,000 years since the Dark Ages. All of this exceeded Cadlia's expectations. As a powerhouse at sea who was knowledgeable and had acquired many secrets, she instantly connected the time and descriptions to a famous concept in history, the cataclysm. Following that, she followed this line of thought and made a further inference. The forsaken land of the gods. Suddenly, the figure she looked up to surfaced in Cadlia's mind once again. A sentence filled with an emotive sigh surfaced. He had always been searching for the forsaken land of the gods back when he was alive. He said that the ultimate answer towards everything is hidden there. The sun comes from the forsaken land of the gods which Emperor Roselle couldn't find despite all his efforts. Mr. Fool can connect to that place directly. No, perhaps, he awoke from that place. Cadlia thought in alarm and solemnity. She had previously belittled the Tarot Club because the moon, justice, and the sun were of low sequences. She believed that with Mr. Fool having awoken only recently, he was obviously unable to pull members of significant strength. However, she now had to reevaluate matters. It involves the forsaken land of the gods, the Church of Storms, the Church of Mother Earth, the lone aristocrats. Perhaps, it's precisely because they're low sequences that these members can be nurtured to be able to reach higher ranks in their respective circles without being suspected. This will allow them to play a more important role. As for me, is it because of the Moses ascetic order or Her Majesty? Cadlia seriously analyzed the motives of Mr. Fool. At this moment, the transactions were nearly coming to an end. The moon, the sun, and justice had all confirmed their respective transactions. As for the hermit Cadlia, she was still observing. Out of caution, she didn't rashly open her mouth to expose more information about herself. Alger had originally planned on making a request to buy the sequence 5 Ocean Songster's potion formula so that he could make the subsequent preparations, but with the addition of the hermit, he became especially wary. He gave up on his decision at the last minute and prepared to push it back until he had really advanced to Windblast. Only with him being stronger would he have the room to breathe. As Furs would be able to obtain the astrologer potion formula and a certain amount of ingredients from her teacher soon, she hadn't prioritized her purchases yet, so all she did was watch silently. She actually curbed her desire to buy a mystical item to make up for her relatively showy trickmaster powers that were lacking in strength, as well as how her apprentice powers were only good for passing through walls and opening doors. However, her real-life circumstances restricted her desires. Up to this day, her savings had exceeded £400. For a member of the middle class, that was rather good, but she clearly remembered how Miss Justice had bought a mystical item for £5,500 previously. Even if it was a relatively average mystical item without significant negative side effects, it will still require £1,000 to £2,000. Furs languidly sat there, unable to open her mouth to make a purchase. Klein controlled the world to scan his surroundings before hoarsely saying, "I need a pair of eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle." The supplementary ingredients of a Nimblerite master, Drago bark and the spring water from Sonia Island's Golden Spring, were commonly seen items in the mysterious world. As long as he purchased them at different occasions, he wouldn't garner suspicion from anyone. Therefore, Klein only requested for the eyes of a 6-winged gargoyle. The hermit glanced at the world and said without rushing, £300, or the equivalent cost in gold coins. She had noticed that the previous transactions were all made in Loan's gold pound. As expected of the Admiral of Stars who has a pirate crew with an ancient faction backing her. She is very resourceful, and her prices are cheaper than usual. If not for Little Sun's imminent advancement, and how he would soon obtain the method for removing the mental corruption of a Beyonder characteristic, I would have even consulted her on this problem. Klein thought as he made the world smile deeply. Okay. With the transaction completed, the palace that resembled a giant's residence fell silent for more than 10 seconds. Without Mr. Fool's reminder, Justice, the Sun, and company knew that they had entered the free exchange segment. The hanged man Alger deliberately looked at Miss Justice and Miss Magician without looking at Ma'am Hermit. Something major recently happened in the Rorstad archipelago. He didn't plan on divulging the world's involvement since it was very likely that Mr. Fool was in possession of the sea god's identity. If he were to rashly confirm this matter, it might spoil Mr. Fool's plans and throw himself into danger. He planned on using a normal tone to mention the happenings on the surface while emphasizing the Moses Ascetic Order member, archaeologist and adventurer, Letitia. He planned on using this to sound out the hermit to figure out if she was Admiral of Stars, Cadlia. This was because this pirate admiral was rumored to also be a member of the Moses Ascetic Order. What happened? Justice asked with piqued interest. Alger said calmly, a disguised archaeologist, Letitia, discovered an ancient elvish ruin in Simeem Island and took out an item from it. This pushed the deity the locals believed in, sea god Calvetua, to be on the brink of collapse. This fake god wished to create tsunamis to drown the island so that everyone could accompany it in its death, but it was stopped by the Church of Storm's Sea King. Finally, Letitia was found and Calvetua had died. The threat of the tsunamis was leveled, but strangely, the devout believers of the sea god would still occasionally receive responses. Letitia is dead. For an ancient elvish ruin. Cadlia had heard of this archaeologist, who was part of the same organization, before, but she wasn't too familiar with her. This was because formal members of the Moses Ascetic Order had to spend a certain amount of time in silent ascetic training. When fully paying attention, she was able to control her powers in a way that significantly exceeded the average person. Therefore, she only seemed slightly stirred as she listened seriously to the hanged man's description without showing any obvious abnormalities. When the hanged man said that Calvetua was dead and how the sea god still responded to its believers, Cadlia first frowned in puzzlement before using her spiritual intuition to recall a certain scene. Yesterday, she had seen Mr. Fool hold a milky white scepter when he pulled her above the grey fog. At the tip of the scepter were many tiny blue gems, which were swirling with countless points of holy light, and more importantly, it emanated an aura of godhood, one that seemed like the corporeal aura of the ocean and storm. This. Cadlia instinctively turned her head to the end of the long bronze table, where Mr. Fool was shrouded in the greyish-white fog. Why is she looking at Mr. Fool? Audrey sharply noticed the hermit's subtle motion. This left her somewhat suspicious. From her point of view, this was an atypical response. Mr. Hanged Man was clearly mentioning something that had little to do with everyone. He was talking about the so-called sea god Calvetua's ability to occasionally reply to its believers despite its apparent death, so why would Ma'am Hermit look towards Mr. Fool? Calvetua's death. Occasionally replying to its believers. Ma'am Hermit is looking at Mr. Fool. Could it be? Audrey's eyes lit up as she came to a conclusion. Could it be that Mr. Fool is the one replying to Calvetua's believers? Ma'am Hermit knows about this, so. As thoughts whizzed through her mind, Audrey had turned her body halfway to look expectantly at Mr. Fool, who was seated leisurely at the end of the long bronze table. Meanwhile, Alger was also surprised and alarmed about the hermit's unexpected reaction. I was only trying to sound her out about what connection she has with the Moses Ascetic Order member, Letitia. Why would she suddenly turn to look at Mr. Fool? Could it be that she knows that the current sea god is a manifestation of Mr. Fool? Her reaction implies this is highly likely. Before she was recruited into the Tarot Club, did she have a lot of secret exchanges with Mr. Fool, and was already secretly working for him? The more Alger thought, the more he paid attention to the hermit. Then, he subconsciously joined her in looking towards Mr. Fool, who was shrouded in the greyish-white fog. He, the hermit, and Justice turned around at different times, but their nearly unanimous actions made the magician Furs and company notice something amiss. Why are they looking at Mr. Fool? Does sea god Calvetua's death have to do with Mr. Fool? Believing they were smart, Furs and Emlyn began guessing at the reason as they cast their gaze to the end of the long bronze table. Derek didn't know who sea god Calvetua was, nor did he understand what it meant for it to respond to its believers even after its death. However, since everyone was looking at Mr. Fool, he naturally looked over as well. The world was late by a second, as though he was deliberating over something. He first scanned the hanged man, making him shudder in fear. Then, he changed the direction of his gaze. At this point, Klein had already come to realize which detail Ma'am Hermit had used to guess that he was the one replying to sea god Calvetua's believers in its stead. He was still stumped over what stance to use. Should I pretend that it's a trivial matter and that I didn't take it to heart, but since you mentioned it, I'll just admit it in passing? Or should I take the stance that since I'm a god, there's no need for me to explain myself to you, so there's no need for me to admit or deny anything? Klein recalled the fool's persona and quickly made a decision. The choice was to neither admit or deny anything, so as to prevent him from losing his standing as a god. However, he would add a single sentence on a particular point, making those who had failed to guess it become more puzzled, while the suspicious ones would be enlightened but would still be left shrouded in confusion as they realized, deep down, how unfathomable Mr. Fool was. With this in mind, Klein, who had leaned back, chuckled. He said leisurely and indifferently, Calvetua became a demigod by relying on a relic left behind by Calamity Kohinum. So they're consulting Mr. Fool about the situation with the sea god. But that doesn't convince me. It feels like there's a deeper truth hidden behind this matter. Could it be? No way, right? Furs frowned as she began coming up with all sorts of thoughts. As expected. Cadlia believed Mr. Fool was giving a straightforward answer while also informing them of some secrets. That demigod scepter is Calvetua's characteristic or Calamity Kohinum's relic, or is it something that covers both definitions? Who is Calamity Kohinum? The name sounds elvish. Yes, the hanged man mentioned that Letitia found an ancient elven ruin. It's the residence of a high elf. How did Mr. Fool get that scepter? Did he rely on the hanged man or someone else? No, it doesn't seem like the hanged man, otherwise, he wouldn't have proactively mentioned this matter. What motive does Mr. Fool have behind responding to the sea god's believers? Is this required for his awakening, something that can truly affect reality? The more Katlia thought, the more she found Mr. Fool unfathomable. It was just like how his body was being concealed by the thick gray fog. The clearer she could see him, the more puzzled, horrified, and apprehensive she became. This might be a tussle between gods. Katlia sighed inwardly as the emotions got the better of her. I guessed right. Alger finally verified that the present sea god was a manifestation of the fool. His worries and indecision from before were instantly rewarded. On certain occasions, as a fake sea god believer, I can openly pray. I wonder how much Mr. Fool has recovered. How much of his power can he release from the seal? It's at least at the demigod level. He will be able to provide tremendous protection at sea. The hermit's unsurprised reaction implies that she had long interacted with Mr. Fool and had learned of certain things ahead of time. This implies that her sequence isn't low. She might really be a powerhouse at the pirate admiral level. This is both good and bad news for me. The good news is that I have an additional powerful faction at sea supporting me. At times, we can tacitly cooperate and complete matters that were previously deemed unimaginable. The bad news is that a lot of my news and resource channels will be overshadowed by hers. My purpose in the Tarot Club will drastically decline. Of course, that's under the premise that she really is Admiral of Stars. Yes, I have to adjust my focus from gathering news and resources and align it towards the church. This is something she can't supplant me, Alger thought with joy and wariness. That sea god is really Mr. Fool. No, it should be said that the present sea god is Mr. Fool's manifestation. He has truly begun interfering with the real world. This is great. In the future, I can pray to see God directly and receive a response when I'm out traveling at sea. Audrey felt surprised, overjoyed, and proud. According to what she knew, the churches didn't do fixed ritualistic magic internally. The ones who received responses by solely praying to the deities were mainly priests or a chance occurrence, otherwise, they were adorers who just numbered at a handful. As for receiving a response from every prayer, they would be an extreme exception, even among adorers. But I can. Mr. Fool is returning to his Iron, one step at a time. Replacing Sea God is one of those steps. Audrey didn't hide the changes in her emotions as she smiled, sitting straight and elegantly. Kohinam. That's an elf's name. I think I've heard someone mention it before. Emlyn attempted to recall, but it was in vain. As for Calvetua's death and how the sea god still replied to its believers, as well as the reason why the hermit, Justice, the hanged man had looked towards Mr. Fool, he had made a slight guess without thinking too deeply about the matter. What has this got to do with me? It doesn't affect my saving of the sanguine, nor is it anything of interest. Anyway, I can just pray to Mr. Fool if there are any problems. Emlyn mumbled to himself, showing disdain towards the emotional changes the others had. Calamity. Queen of Calamity. But there are no records that say that her name is Kohinam. Derek turned his head to the left very slightly, a common tic he did when he recalled things. From the looks of it, Little Son isn't sure if Kohinam is the Queen of Calamity, otherwise, he wouldn't have such a reaction. Klein retracted his gaze in disappointment. He controlled the world to cough, pulling everyone back from their thoughts. Following that, the world conjured a picture with the fool's help. He showed it to both sides of the table and asked, "Does anyone know her?" It was a picture of the red-haired Helene. Klein mainly wanted to know if Admiral of Stars Katlia or the hanged man Alger knew her. After all, they were well-informed people out at sea. Alger glanced at it and just as he was about to say that he didn't know her, he heard Ma'am Hermit say with a deep voice, "Red-haired Helene." She's from a fallen noble family and has the bloodline from the Iridases Sauron family. Cadlia paused before adding, she was once a trader out at sea, but she was later said to have been abducted by Ailment Maiden Tracy. Abducted by Ailment Maiden Tracy? I thought it would be some contrived story about a domineering pirate and a noble lady. However, Tracy can be considered a domineering pirate. Heh heh. Klein instantly made some connections. Furs was still lost in her thoughts over the connection between Sea God and the Fool when she suddenly snapped to her senses. She acutely noticed that great opportunities lay in red-haired Helene and Vice Admiral Ailment's story as she began to daydream. To her regret, Ma'am Hermit had only said a few sentences without continuing. The Hermit knows Vice Admiral Ailment. However, that doesn't imply anything. Beyonders of a certain sequence or knowledgeable people will know who the 7 pirate admirals are. Their bounty posters are everywhere. The Hermit is rather aware of matters over at Intis. This is something that can be determined for now. The Hanged Man wasn't interested in red-haired Helene, only the Hermit's real identity. With red-haired Helene's matter coming to a close, Audrey began considering if she should consult the others about the Mind Dragon. Unlike before, there was now the addition of Ma'am Hermit, who was of unknown character and dubious allegiances. This left her hesitant. After a brief deliberation, she said, I recently sought out the traces of a Mind Dragon and went to a place which has the tradition of worshipping dragons. She had concealed the exact location as the details might implicate her.